listed on the board for energy systems. Look at that in your notes. You've got the stored ATP, a couple of subcategories there, stored ATP and stored creatine phosphate. And then you have the glycolysis and fermentation. And then you've got the complete oxidation of glucose. And then finally, burning of fat. And then we went back and talked about number one. It didn't take long to talk about because it's the stored ATP. But I don't know if I gave that one a name called the phosphagen. The phosphagen energy system. So that's the A, stored ATP, and B, stored creatine phosphate. So that takes us to number 2. In your notes, you'll see it listed as glycolysis and fermentation. It's also called the glycogen lactate system. And this was the 1.3 to 1.6 minutes. And basically a biology 111 topic. So that's where we are. So again, look at the list in your notes from Wednesday, so we're all on the same page. The outline for the lecture references chapter 25. That's an excellent source of review if you've thrown away the Biology 111 book. And by the way, if you did throw away the Biology 111 book, as Andy Griffith used to say to Opie, let that be a lesson to you. Don't ever get rid of a book that's part of your major, okay? If you want to ditch the music appreciation book, that's one thing. All these science books that you buy, let them become part of your permanent library. I don't think they give you anything for them when you resell them anyway, do they? $10, $20, $30 for a $300 book. Okay, so this is energy system number 2. Glycogen lactate system, consisting of glycolysis and fermentation. It is anaerobic. And 1.3 to 1.6 minutes. Okay, well, since we start with glycolysis, we must start with glucose. Now, as we go through these energy systems, the only reactions, the only steps, the only intermediates you're responsible for are the ones I write on the board. So, for example, when I draw the Krebs cycle, I'll have 4 or 5 things in it. When you look in chapter 25, you'll see a dozen or more things in it. So just the ones I draw on the board. So we start with glucose. And recall that you energize the molecule twice by spending 2 molecules of ATP. Probably recognize those steps when I remind you of them. You phosphorylate glucose, creating glucose 6-phosphate. Then you rearrange glucose 6-phosphate, creating fructose 6-phosphate. Then you phosphorylate fructose 6-phosphate, and you get fructose 1,6-diphosphate. So what we're doing here is we're energizing the molecule. It's like pushing a car. Maybe it's easy for us to push it, but it's hard to get it started. Once we get it rolling, it's easier to keep it rolling. Or it's like, I don't know, going to Cripple Creek or something. You have to put money in and hope to get something out. You have to make an initial investment. So we're in the hole now, trying to make ATP, and we start out in the hole. We cut the molecule in half, and that gives us not enough room. That gives us 2 molecules of pyruvate. But once again, and make sure you hear this, the only intermediates you're responsible for are the ones I allude to or write on the board. So if you look in chapter 25, you look in your biology notes, there's a ton of stuff I haven't put here or said anything about. It means I'm not going to ask you about it. I did mention glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, fructose 1,6-diphosphate, but other than that, I haven't mentioned any of these intermediates, so don't memorize them like you did in biology. It's not necessary. Now we reduce a molecule of NAD, generating NADH. Remember that the electron acceptor NAD comes from the B vitamin niacin. This, of course, is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, the vitamin niacin. And this is worth 0. You probably remember that NADH is generally worth 3 ATP. In glycolysis, sometimes it's worth 3, sometimes it's worth 2. But in this case, it's worthless, because when we get down here to the pyruvate, we're not going to make acetyl coenzyme A and feed the Krebs cycle. That's the transition reaction. Instead, we're going to undergo fermentation. That's why this is an anaerobic process. To get any ATP out of NADH, remember that has to be processed by the electron transport system. There is no electron transport system right now because we're functioning anaerobically. Now we phosphorylate 2 molecules of ADP, generating 2 molecules of ATP. We do that on both the upper and lower pathways. So that's positive 2, and that's positive 2. So in terms of energy, we've got -2 right there. We've got a couple of zeros. And we've got a couple of positive 2s. So our sum is 2 ATP. That's, of course, not very much. If you do the math, you all remember that you get 36 to 38 out of a molecule of glucose. So that's 5.26%. All right, so that's glycolysis. Now again, if we were doing plain old biology 111 metabolism, if we were completely oxidizing glucose, we would convert the pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A, and we would feed the Krebs cycle. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're doing something called fermentation. So with fermentation, we take the pyruvate and we make lactic acid. And there's an extremely important reason for making the lactic acid. We don't make it because we enjoy the burn in our thighs. We don't make it because we enjoy the burn in our arms. The process of fermentation, let's see, we'll change to green here. So things are kind of color-coded. The process of fermentation oxidizes NADH, regenerating NAD.
Can you repeat that?
The process of fermentation oxidizes NADH, regenerating NAD. Recall that over here, in glycolysis, NAD is a substrate. It's reduced to NADH. We can't keep doing this unless we have NAD available. So the purpose of fermentation is to regenerate the NAD. This NAD can come back over here and act as substrate. Again, we don't undergo fermentation because we enjoy the pain of producing lactic acid and feeling that burn. The purpose of fermentation is that it regenerates this substrate and allows us to keep going. We don't get much energy, but we get some. It's better than nothing, especially if we're trying to escape a predator. How often do you do that? But other animals do, and we all use these same pathways. You know, frogs use the same pathways we use, even mosquitoes. Now this limit of 1.3 to 1.6 minutes what's that all about? Well, it hurts. I mean, go to the local high school or middle school where there's a track. Jog a couple of miles and get yourself warmed up, and then start doing one lap fast. You do 40 laps fast. Start doing one lap fast and one lap slow. One lap fast and one lap slow. Can you run even one lap at maximum speed? No, you can't. The pace that you could maintain running the length of a football field, you can't maintain all the way around the track. Why not? Well, it hurts. Why does it hurt? Lactic acid, fatigue. But there's more to it than that. There's a reason. Because you can train through pain. You can learn to embrace pain. And any of you that swim, bike, run, whatever, you know a lot about that. The only way to run through the pain is to train in pain. There's a true story. I don't remember the young lady's name, but she went out for cross country in high school, and after the first race, which she lost, she told her coach how much fun she had. I just enjoyed that. It was the greatest thing in the world. He said, "What? You must not have been pushing yourself very hard." And she said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's gonna hurt. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be fun before you do it and fun after you do it. But while you're doing it, it's going to be painful." She took his advice and she won every race after that and became a famous Olympic athlete. I wish I could remember her name. But they failed to tell her that running fast is painful. Anyway, there's another reason for the limit. In Biology 111, you did a lab. You were put into groups. One group looked at, this is the lab that started with something like a turnip. And the professor or instructor, whatever you had a blender. And they had to grind the turnip up. And it may not have been, there are other ways to do it. But what they were doing is they were extracting an enzyme. And one group looked at the effectiveness or the effect of temperature. So one group ran the experiment, and you're looking at the reaction rate plotted against different temperatures. And you saw that at higher temperatures, the reaction was faster. Up to a point of boiling, you denature the enzyme. Another group looked at how increasing the substrate concentration would affect the rate. Another group looked at how increasing the enzyme concentration would affect the rate. One group looked at what happens when you add an inhibitor to the equation, but the group that's of interest to us right now is the group that looked at how the reaction rate is affected by different pHs. And you learned that every reaction has an optimal pH. So the reaction will occur at a variety of pHs, but the maximum rate corresponds to that pH. Will the reaction occur at this pH? Yes, but not as efficiently. What do you think's happening in your muscle tissue when you're producing lactic acid? There goes the pH. You get further and further and further away from the optimal pH. So you can train through the pain. You can learn to train in pain and compete in pain. You can ski the bumps in pain, whatever you want to think about. Of course, not in Colorado anymore. It doesn't snow here anymore. But you can't do anything about this. You can't do anything about that. Now, the other thing to point out here before this goes away, and of course realize that energy system number 3 is going to start out like this, right? Because it's a complete oxidation of glucose, and that's glycolysis, and then transition reaction to acetyl, and then Krebs cycle. So we're going to see this again, but we'll be focusing on the blue, not the black. But before this goes away, I want to talk for a second about what determines where we go at this fork in the road. Okay, if you're a single person, I don't care if you're hiking, biking, or in a car, if you come to a fork in the road, you have to go left or right. You can't cut yourself in half. You got to go left or right. But what if there's 100 people here or 100 cars here? Some can go left, some can go right. So what percentage of your pyruvate takes the aerobic pathway versus what percentage takes the anaerobic pathway? Well, you can only consume so much oxygen per minute. If you use more oxygen than you can consume, you go into oxygen debt. Write this down. As long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you consume is used to feed exercise, you will remain predominantly aerobic. I'll say that 2 or 3 more times. As long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you consume is used to feed exercise, you will remain in a predominantly aerobic state. So we're thinking about what determines the way we go at the fork in the road. One molecule of pyruvate has to go left or right. But if there's 10,000 molecules of pyruvate, some can go left, some can go right. We want to send as many to the left as possible because we want to remain aerobic. And we can stay aerobic, quote, as long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you consume goes to feed exercise, you remain in a predominantly aerobic state. When you cross that line, and more than 50% of what you're consuming is feeding exercise, you shift into an anaerobic state. When more than 50% of the oxygen you're consuming is feeding exercise, cross the line and you shift into an anaerobic state. So as long as no more than 50% of what you consume is feeding exercise, you're going to be making acetyl, you're going to be feeding the Krebs cycle, you're going to be aerobic. But when you cross that line, now 51%, 55%, 60%, 70% of what you consume is feeding exercise, you're going to have to start sending your pyruvate down the anaerobic pathway. Kind of like having a box of money. You got all this stuff to buy. As long as there's money in the box, you'll pay for it. When the box is empty, and there are things you still need, I hope you don't do it, but what do some people do in that case?
Credit card.
Credit card. Yeah. And they rationalize it, they say, well, we have to eat. You're right, you do. And so you credit card.
Did you need the $4 for you?
What?
But did you need the $4 for you?
Well, probably not. So that's more of a Dave Ramsey issue, so we won't go there. But anyway, it's the same thing exactly. That's why we use the word here, oxygen debt. If we're using more oxygen than we are consuming, we go into oxygen debt. How do we know? How do we quantify that? Once again, as long as no more than 50% of what you consume is feeding exercise, you will remain largely aerobic. But when you cross that line, you become anaerobic. We can measure this, approximate it, is a function of our heart rate. I'll have a lot more to say about that later.
Question.
I'm listening.
Just for reference, are we to always assume that glucose is going to present 38 ATPs in your?
I'll talk a little bit later about why sometimes it's less. The bottom line answer to that is it's tissue specific. So are we in the kidneys? Are we in the brain? Are we in cardiac muscle? Are we in skeletal muscle? But just to make the mathless and easy, I tend to work with max yield, which is 38.
Okay.
So unless told otherwise, the answer to your question would be yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to keep it simple. Okay, energy system number 3, the complete oxidation of glucose. Aerobic. This was the 2 to 4 hour system. We talked about that range and how it's a function of your glycogen stores before you start whatever it is you're doing. It's also a function of what are you consuming while you're working. Okay, make sure you've got lots of room. We start with glucose again. Start with glycolysis again specifically. You can look in your notes from Wednesday where I just listed the 4 energy systems, and you wrote down that this consists of glycolysis, transition reaction, Krebs cycle, and running in the background we have the electron transport system and oxidative phosphorylation, also called chemiosmotic oxidation. I wrote all that on the board, so I'm sure you did as well. So we burn the 2 molecules of ATP, go 2 in the hole, we reduce NAD, NADH, phosphorylate 2 molecules of ADP, generating 2 molecules of ATP, Looks exactly like glycolysis looked in the previous system. Now here's where we see the difference when you compare this to the previous system. Because this is the complete oxidation, glycolysis, acetyl Krebs cycle, because this is aerobic, the electron transport system is running. So this NADH does have value. This is where in biology you got into, is this worth 2 or is it worth 3? NADH is typically worth 3, but glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, and in some cases, when glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, these NADHs are worth 2 instead of 3 because the NADH has to be moved from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria. And that was your whole 36 to 38 thing. Keeping in line with what we just talked about, we're going to just use max yield. So that's worth 3 ATP because of the electron transport system. Okay, we make our pyruvate. Like we did in the last system. Now you all know that glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. So what we've done is cut it in half. In the last energy system, from here, we made lactic acid. That was the anaerobic pathway. It was called fermentation. This time we are instead making acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl is a 2-carbon molecule. So we get rid of, as we go from 3 carbons to 2 carbons, we get rid of a carbon via carbon dioxide. Coenzyme A is, well, it's an enzyme. It has to be added to the equation. Technically, it's a substrate in this reaction. It's put in. Off with our carbon dioxide, in with our coenzyme A. This is the aerobic pathway. Put that there. In terms of energy, this transition reaction results in the reduction of a molecule of NAD, generating a molecule of NADH. And that is absolutely, definitely worth 3 ATP. And you don't even have to ask here how do I know whether or not the electron transport chain is running? Oh, it's running, because if it wasn't running, what? If it wasn't running,
We would have already
Lactic
gone
acid.
into it.
we wouldn't do this, would we? We would do that instead. Now, once again, guys, we've got that fork in the road. Let's have that same discussion. If this is one car or one hiker, they have to go left or right at the fork. But if there's 1,000 cars here, some can go left, some can go right. As long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you are consuming, you've already written this down, maybe just look at it in your notes. As long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you are consuming is feeding exercise, you will remain aerobic. When you cross that line, and more than 50% of what you're consuming is feeding exercise, you go anaerobic. So as long as you can, you're going to go from pyruvate to acetyl. Which, when you're consuming as much oxygen as you can, you continue to function, you're going to start sending the pyruvate to lactate. So it's not that you are in energy system number 2 or number 3 exclusively. You're always in pretty much all of the energy systems. As I was leaving the classroom on Wednesday, and I don't know if it was the morning class or the afternoon class, but I was talking to a student and I said, well, right now as we're walking, we're burning fat. There's no reason to use our sugar, we're just walking down the hall. We have lots more oxygen than we need, plenty of oxygen to burn fat, and that's what we're doing. Prior to walking through the door, prior to leaving the classroom, that same person had asked me about, well, when do you use energy system number 1? Bang, run for your life. What if you had to say, wait a minute, I gotta make some ATP. Okay, now I can run for my life. So that energy system number 1, what is it? Stored ATP and stored creatine phosphate. That lets you jump and move when you gotta go. I don't mean bathroom, I mean run for your life. Building's on fire, whatever. What if you had to make the ATP before you could get out of your chair and walk? Much less run because the building's on fire. So that's when, anyway, everything's always working. It's just a matter of what are we doing more of, what are we doing less of. All right, glycolysis. Fermentation, which we're not doing right now. Transition reaction. Also, I mentioned last week, your teacher may have called it the preliminary step to the Krebs cycle. Okay, I don't have room to draw 2 Krebs cycles, so I'll just abbreviate one down here, and I'll draw a Krebs cycle up here. What we've got, and again, just pay attention to the intermediates I talk about. We've got oxaloacetic acid, which is a 2-carbon molecule, a 4-carbon molecule. And we're going to connect acetyl to oxaloacetic. Coenzyme A is a coupling enzyme. And here's what coenzyme A does. This is the 2-carbon acetyl, and this is the 4-carbon oxaloacetic. Coenzyme A is the coupling enzyme. I'm coenzyme A. Right? So, coenzyme A connects acetyl to oxaloacetic, and that gives us citric acid. 4 plus 2 is 6. Coenzyme A has done its job. It has connected the 2 and the 4. So coenzyme A is spit out. It can be reused. It can do the same thing over and over and over. Remember what you learned about enzymes. Enzymes are utilized. They're released unchanged, they're recycled, they're not consumed. Citric acid cycles back to oxaloacetic. How do we get from 6 back to 4? Well, 6 minus 2 is 4, so we give off a couple of molecules of carbon dioxide. Once again, there's a ton of intermediates in here. Probably remember a lot of them. I won't be asking you about them. If I was going to ask you about them, I would either write them on the board or verbalize them to you. Okay, what do we get here in terms of energy? Well, a ton. And remember, when you get home, you've got big sheet of paper, piece of poster board. Maybe you're going to go to Target, buy a piece of poster board, and you're going to draw all this and make it beautiful. Everything we show here, you're going to show here as well. So what do we get in terms of energy? Well, in no particular order, we reduce 3 molecules of NAD, generating 3 molecules of NADH. And if NADH is worth 3, and we've got 3 NADHs, and that's 9. Got another 9 down here. We reduce 1 molecule of FAD, generating FADH. That's worth 2. We've got 2 down here as well. Now the NADH, again, that's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's the B vitamin niacin. FAD is flavin adenine dinucleotide. That's the B vitamin riboflavin. And then we phosphorylate 1 molecule of GDP, generating GTP. And then we transfer the phosphate from guanine to adenine, so we phosphorylate ADP, generating ATP. So it's an ATP, it's just a 2-step process to get it. And that, of course, is worth 1. And that 1 shows up down here as well. So out of a single turn of the Krebs cycle, realizing that the electron transport system is running, so we get the ATP from niacin and from riboflavin. How many ATP do we get out of 1 turn of the Krebs cycle? 12. Because we've got 3 of these, and they're worth 3 apiece. 3 times 3 is 9. We've got 1 of these that's worth 2. 9 plus 2 is 11. We've got 1 here. 11 plus 1 is 12. So the Krebs cycle is worth 12. So, starting with the glucose molecule, how much ATP, including the electron transport system, how much ATP do we get out of Krebs cycles? 24, because there's 2 Krebs cycles here. Get back to this, the fork in the road thing. Let's put heart rate question mark in there. Okay, so next we need to think about how we get the ATP from the NADH and the FADH. Back to that fork in the road and start really tying all of this into exercise and aerobic exercise versus anaerobic exercise. To give you let's read the last chapter of the book like you said you do with murder mysteries. If you wanted to classify this as aerobic versus anaerobic exercise, when you're jogging with your friend on a relatively level trail, and you're talking about the job, school, the spouse or significant other, the dog, the children, and you're not walking, you're jogging, but the pace is such that you can carry on a conversation, you're in an aerobic state. You're probably 60-65% of your maximum heart rate. You start pushing that pace, push that pace, push that pace, and pretty soon there's not much talking going on. Crossing the line from aerobic to anaerobic. Okay, so this business of the electron transport system. And oxidative phosphorylation. Again, you wrote it down on Wednesday, so I'm going to write it down again, but you might have called this chemiosmotic phosphorylation in biology. The top of the electron transport system, we have FMN, or flavin mononucleotide, again a riboflavin component. And our next electron acceptor is coenzyme Q. And then we have a series of cytochrome molecules. Not just two, but as with everything, I'm abbreviating the heck out of it. NADH hands its electrons to FMN, and that oxidizes NADH back to NAD. Those electrons flow downhill, we say, moving from one electron acceptor to another. Each electron acceptor is holding the electrons at a lower energy level. Protons are following because they're oppositely charged. And because the electrons are flowing downhill, as we say, meaning each electron acceptor holds them at a lower energy level, energy is being released. There are three major drops in energy. Each of these drops in energy corresponds to an ATP, which takes us to the NADH is usually worth 3. FADH, in contrast, hands off to coenzyme Q. Now those electrons and protons flow down the hill. But if you look at where FADH starts, it gets 2 of the big energy drops. It misses the first one because it hands off to CoQ, not FMN. So the FADH works out to 2 ATP rather than 3. At the bottom of this electron transport chain, these electrons and protons are given to half a molecule of oxygen. I mean, we can't really show an oxygen atom, periodic table, octet rule, all that crap. So the only way to show an oxygen atom is to show half a molecule. But when we add the protons to the half a molecule of oxygen, we get water. You can all remember reading in your book and your teacher telling you that oxygen is the terminal electron acceptor of the electron transport system. Oxygen is reduced to water. As I will tell you next semester when this comes up again, because this stuff never goes away, guys. I know you get sick of me telling you that, but I tell you that because I have to impress upon you that it doesn't. I mean, I was talking one day to a 3rd or 4th semester nursing student, and the person was studying frickin' osmosis. Not really studying it, but it was in their book. They were reading it, and they're like, well, I don't even have to read this. How many times have I been tested on it? Why are they studying osmosis? Well, because they're studying renal function. We don't do this just because we don't like you, okay? We do this because this is the meat of life. So, as I'll tell you next semester, and when I do, I generally beat on the wall and disrupt the class next door. Guys, this is why you breathe. Right here. This is it. You don't breathe because it hurts to hold your breath. You breathe because most of the energy you get, the ATP you get, comes through NADH and FADH. You get very, very little substrate level ATP. This is why you breathe. And if this system shuts down because of poison, guess what the cause of death is? And if you go to the moon and die because you didn't take your breathing apparatus, guess what the cause of death is? And if you drown, guess what the cause of death is? And if you're strangled, guess what the cause of death is? And if you're in your garage working on your car and it's running and the garage door's closed and you're inhaling carbon monoxide and all your hemoglobin is bound up with carbon monoxide so your hemoglobin can't bind oxygen, guess what the cause of death is? Hypo, low oxygen. Doesn't matter whether your heart's not transporting the oxygen, whether there's no oxygen in the atmosphere, whether you're not inhaling the oxygen, or if the oxygen's not being used. The cause of death is hypoxia. Now, when we talk about this officially next semester, we'll have 4 or 5 types of hypoxia, which allow us to differentiate between your heart's not moving the oxygen, your hemoglobin's tied up with carbon monoxide, you drown, you went to the moon without your oxygen. Well, that's not really one, but electron transport system's not operating. You can look that up. Went to the moon, didn't take my breathing apparatus. I've actually never done that. Okay, so electron transport system, what about this mess? So what do we do with this energy that's released as the electrons flow downhill? Well, you all know this whole mess is occurring in the mitochondria. Remember what the mitochondria looks like. Outer membrane, inner membrane, outer compartment or intermembranous space, inner compartment or matrix, just basic biology there. This energy that's released green for the protons. This energy that's released creates a proton concentration gradient. These were the little proton pumps you talked about in biology. So you create a proton concentration gradient in this outer compartment or inner membranous space. So literally, that released energy pumps protons into the intermembranous space. So we're just transforming the energy from one source to another source to another source to another source. So as the electrons flow that down the hill, held at lower and lower energy levels, the energy released is moved to create this concentration gradient. It's potential energy. The electron transport system is, of course, in this membrane, all over the place in the mitochondria. Well, those protons, they want to move into the matrix, and the equilibration of that gradient drives the phosphorylation of ADP. Some of you remember there's some little pores here. And as those protons move through those little pores, the ADP is phosphorylated. It's the energy of the movement of the protons through the pores that drives the phosphorylation of the ADP. That's what the oxidative phosphorylation thing is all about. Let's go back to that fork in the road. So we have the aerobic pathway versus the anaerobic pathway. You've got this in your notes 2 times already, but we need it here sort of by itself. And you've written down that as long as no more than 50% of the oxygen you are consuming is used to fuel exercise, you remain in a predominantly aerobic state. When you cross that line, and more than 50% of the oxygen you are consuming is fueling exercise, you start shifting into an anaerobic state. And it is a function of our heart rate. At least that's how we can quantify it without drawing blood and testing for oxygen and testing for carbon dioxide and testing for lactic acid. So if we make a little chart, we look at how the fate of pyruvate, that is, what percentage of the pyruvate is used to make acetyl, the aerobic pathway, and what percentage is used to make lactic acid, the anaerobic pathway. We look at that as a function of the percent of our maximum heart rate that we're functioning at. So without any numbers in the leftmost column at first, that represents a pure aerobic state. All of your pyruvate is making acetyl. You're 100% aerobic. The other extreme would be you're in a 100% anaerobic state. This is the Olympic athlete running the 100 meters, perhaps. He can run, or she can run 100 meters just as fast not breathing as they can breathing. They don't need to breathe. They don't have time to breathe. Now, in between these two extremes, we would go through states such as 60-40, 55-45, 50-50, 45-55, 40-60. Look what's happening here. 55% aerobic, only 45% anaerobic. So you're primarily aerobic, just as you are here. Here you're 50-50. And what happened right there? You're primarily anaerobic. For most people, this occurs between 80 and 85% of their maximum heart rate. Now, we are not going to go into it. It'll be a story for another day. But I want you to appreciate that in this left column, we could put every range in increments of 5. So we could say 50 to 55%, 55 to 60%, all the way down to 95 to 100%. As percent of our maximum heart rate. The only zone or range that I'm holding you to is the 80 to 85%. But I just want you to appreciate that you could build this chart with the increments of 5. Who might train here? The recovering heart patient. Man or woman had a heart attack, had bypass surgery or angioplasty. They're going to change their diet, lose some weight, take up an exercise program. But you don't want to kill them. So they're instructed to train with a heart rate monitor and to not let their heart rate exceed 55% of its max. Who's going to train down here? The Olympic athlete trying to get fast for the 100 meter and the 200 meter. Right, this 80 to 85% is called your lactate threshold zone. Your lactate threshold zone is where you make that shift from primarily aerobic, which you are here at 55-45, make the shift from primarily aerobic to primarily anaerobic, which you are here at 45, 55. Some people want to increase the heart rate at which they make that shift. And the only way to do that is to train in that zone. The greatest athletes in the world, the Kenyans, who run, the Boston Marathon, the New York Marathon in 2 hours and 5 minutes, 2 hours and 10 minutes. Can't wait to see the world record go below 2 hours. But those people have a lactate threshold zone of 90 to 95%. That's how they can pull off a 4-minute, 30-second mile at mile 20, going uphill, or some just ungodly thing like that. The lactate threshold zone is so high. The only way they get it high is by training in that zone. But this business of maximum heart rate, what's up with that? Everybody's seen the stupid charts on the wall at the gym, and if you bought a treadmill or an elliptical or a stationary bicycle, you've seen the stupid charts that come with that. It's just all a bunch of crap. Very, very poorly understood. So they tell us that our maximum heart rate, if we're a male, is 220 minus our age. And they tell us that if we're a female, we can use that, but it's slightly more accurate to use 225 minus our age. Bull. Except for almost everyone, that works. See, here's where those equations come from. Recognize these equations. These are linear equations. So we go out into the world, towing a trailer, and on the trailer, we have a treadmill and a stationary bicycle. Because not everybody likes to run. Some people would rather bike. And we can't tow a swimming pool. So for the swimmers, we can't do it for them. And we induce maximum heart rate. We go to multiple cities in every state. So we get a sample of 872,000 people. And we get dots all over here, and we use a linear regression, and we turn the dots into a straight line, and we generate these formulas. So, the older we get, the lower our maximum heart rate. Okay? Great. What do you think about the average people in the United States? Are they active or sedentary?
Sedentary.
Sedentary. Did you know that only 5 to 10%, now this is the United States, Colorado would be a little different. Only 5 to 10% of people in the United States of America are capable of running 2 miles, even if given 30 minutes to do it. They might be able to walk 2 miles in 30 minutes, but that's not allowed. You can either run or you can stop and rest. You can run or you can stop and rest. Only 5 to 10% of people in the United States of America can cover 2 miles via running in 30 minutes or less. So that means 90 to 95% of people in the United States of America are, what's the word? Sedentary. Look at the incidence of obesity in the United States. Look at childhood obesity, and try not to cry when you do. So, what do you think about most of these people that make up our sample? 90 to 95% of them are sedentary. Do these formulas work? Yep, they work for 90 to 95% of people. But guess who they don't work for?
Everybody else.
The people that care. The people that would even want to know any of this. Not know it to pass Larry's exam, but know it because they want to get in shape. Because they don't want to die young like Papaw. Or they want to get fit and healthy, and train for the Garden of the Gods 10-mile run, or whatever it might be. The people who care are the ones that the formulas don't work for. How ironic is that? They work for everybody, 90 to 95%. But the few people that care and would even be interested in this because they're interested in a healthy lifestyle, or they're interested in competing, and it doesn't have to be competing to win money, just want to place in my age group at the St. Patty's Day 5K or whatever. I just want to do the incline faster than my friend. I want to be looking down. Whatever it is, the people that want to do anything that involves a healthy lifestyle, this doesn't work for them. How ironic is that? So, maximum heart rate must be induced. That's the only way to know your maximum heart rate. Let me give you an example. Here's a male. How old is that person?
16.
How old?
16.
And do I look 16 years old to you?
Yes, you do. Bonus points?
Why is my maximum heart rate 204? Because I've been in shape all my life. So you don't know if you're on the black line or the blue line or the green line. I hope you're not on the purple line. But if you stay active, you stop this drop in your maximum heart rate. You look at these little kids at the YMCA, and it doesn't have to be the YMCA, it just happens to be what I'm familiar with. But as fast as one sport ends, another one begins. They have indoor soccer, outdoor soccer. They have swimming, they have volleyball, they have karate, they have basketball, and a lot of other things that I'm sure I don't even remember. But you have these little kids, they sign up for this one, and then they sign up for this one, and then they sign up for this one, and then they sign up for this one. And then in middle school, they run, they wrestle, they swim, whatever it might be. In high school, they do all. And then they get into college and things slow down and it's hard to be as active, and maybe you get a spouse or significant other, and maybe you get kids in the equation, and it becomes more and more difficult to remain active. But the people that are on this blue line and this green line are the people that have been active all their life, which are some of you. 90 to 95% of people are on the black line. I hope you're not on the purple line. That's the people who are sedentary, the people who get their exercise working the remote control. They train the dog to bring them in. Scooter, get daddy a Corona. Here comes the dog. Those are the people on the purple line, okay? You don't want to be there. Again, this is Colorado. We would need totally different formulas, but so yeah, it must be induced. It's the only way to know it. You can go to Boulder and pay to have it induced, or you can do it yourself. It's no big deal. Will altitude affect that? Yeah, this is actually at 10,000 feet. I don't know what my maximum heart rate is at sea level, or even where I live, which is at 7,000 feet. But if you want to induce it, and this will be it for the day, you need a hill. And of course, you need a heart rate monitor, because if you stop and do this, it's just going to be falling. So you run up the hill, and you jog down the hill, and when I say you run up the hill, this is as fast as your little legs will carry you. And you do this 3 to 4 times, and you will max out. Now, because I don't have a medical license, I'm telling you, and I'm being recorded, do not do this! I tell you, don't do it. Having said that, I'll tell you that if you're a normal, healthy person, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to be fun, but it's not going to hurt you. You won't fall on your face and break your nose or anything like that. You'll just be out of breath. The steeper the hill, the shorter it can be. The longer the hill, doesn't have to be steep. So it doesn't have to be a certain thing. Baptist Road would be a great place. Some people use Hydro Street over by the guard trail. It's a good hill on Research Parkway, headed east between Union, tops out and it goes down to Rangewood. Start at Union, run to the top before it heads down to Rangewood, turn around and go back. So that doesn't really matter what hill, there are lots of them. Of interest, it may be of interest, if you're a triathlete, you need your maximum heart rate in all three disciplines. Your absolute max will be obtained running. But if you're a biker, you don't really care what your running max is, you care what your biking max is. Your max is going to be running, your lowest max is going to be swimming. If you're just a swimmer, you don't need your biking max or your running max, you need your swimming max. So the triathlete needs all three. All right, so we need to begin, Natalie, anything that writes, please, quickly. We need to begin on Wednesday with fat burning. Oh, no we don't, scratch that. We need to begin with calculation of training zones.
We're still on sources of ATP though.
We're on Roman numeral 15, metabolism.